On today's episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, Cody has a great conversation with Cole Thompson from Sports Illustrated. We also continue to look at important storylines heading into training camp. Also, Davis Mills, players getting worked out. Texans are still working in spite of. Cody, let's start the show today.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm John Hickman. This is Cody Davis. We are joined by Cole Thompson of Sports Illustrated later today in the show. That's going to be a fun and great segment. However, we got to start off with some terrible news. Back-to-back days, Cody. Very unfortunate. Yesterday, we talked about John Mechie. He went down. Well, he'll be out for the remainder of the year due to leukemia. And the conversation sparked of, well, who could replace John Mechie? Immediately, Cody and I and pretty much everyone that we talked to, John Crumpler, who we had on Monday's show, a lot of people on Twitter, immediately went to familiarity, which was Danny Amendola. Well, today, Danny Amendola announced that he will be retiring from the NFL. I guess he got on Indeed, saw the Texans were hiring and said, no, thank you. Very unfortunate, I think so, for Houston. I thought that was a perfect pairing if you're going to bring somebody in that has worked with your quarterback before. But Danny Amendola officially retiring from the NFL. Great career for Danny Amendola. Two-time Super Bowl champ, played a pivotal role for the Patriots, winning those rings. However, for Houston, I think that is a blow to the possibility of bringing in a veteran wide receiver that's on the market.
Well, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's unfortunate news for the Houston Texans. And yes, I understand he is one of the guys that you and I talked about as a possible replacement for John Mechie. However, John listeners and viewers, John Mechie or not, we are all still expecting this offense to take on a new dynamic for this upcoming season. And if you bring in Danny Amendola, I just feel like we're going to see the same wide receiving core that we saw last year. However, with that being said, John, I'm not surprised that Danny Amendola decided to retire. I remember I had an opportunity to do an exclusive interview with him on Locked On Texans back in December. And if you guys go back, and I'm going to put it somewhere in one of these descriptions, but if you guys go back and you take a listen to that interview, you could kind of start getting the sense that he was ready to retire, because at the time he had went down with a minor, I think it was an ACL tear in his knee that had him out for a couple of weeks. He did come back for the last two games of the regular season. And it would just seem for when you go back and you take a look at that interview, it seems like he was saying, after this season, he's hanging it up. Of course, he talked about the great career he had as a member of the New England Patriots, talked about some of his great moments throughout his career. And one of the things that he said, the last thing on his bucket list was to finally have an opportunity to play for his hometown, to play for the Texans. And that's what he did last season. By the way, I do want to give us a shout out to Danny Amendola, because he did provide somewhat of a spark to this subpar wide receiving core. John, you heard me say this stat a lot. The only difference between him and Chris Conley was a 71 yard receiving yard difference between the two, and that lets you know how much Davis Mills was actually targeting Amendola, because Amendola only played 8 games, and Chris Conley played 16 games. And like I mentioned, the fact that there is only a 71-yard difference between the two says a lot of what Danny Amendola meant to this organization on the field.
Yeah, last year, the last game of the year against Tennessee, Danny Amendola ripped Tennessee's defense for 113, 2 touchdowns, 7 catches. Danny Amendola has also mentioned that he talked to Adam Schefter and he's ready to pursue various outside interests, including broadcasting networks. A lot of these NFL players, and I love this, by the way, a lot of the NFL players are going to the booth for Sundays or Saturdays, and I love it. I just think this was a player that Houston really probably could have used right now in wake of what happened with John Mechie. Now, also, Houston did work out Max Borgi, a Washington State running back. He's a good straight line rusher, 5.8 yards per carry for his career. Very effective as a pass catcher. His first 2 years at Washington State caught 139 passes for 971 yards and 9 touchdowns. His game models Rex Burkhead, and I like it right now. When we talked yesterday about replacing the possible idea of what we believe John Mechie would possibly be for this offense, we talked about how it was going to take multiple guys doing things that they may not be used to at this level right now. And I mentioned how the running backs are going to have to step up and be better pass catchers. This is a skill set of his. Maybe Houston gets him on for this 90-man roster, brings him into training camp, which starts on Friday, and maybe something to happen. If not, then we'll just keep going and talk about whoever else Houston brings in. But I'm not against it right now. I think this is a very cool idea to bring him in because how effective he's been as a pass catcher out of the backfield for Washington State for 4 years. Cody, you're going to like this. Davis Mills ranked 27th quarterback.
Oh, my gosh.
This was a list put together by Mike Sando, 27th out of 32. This list was comprised by 50 NFL coaches and execs, including 6 GMs, 8 head coaches, 10 evaluators, 12 coordinators, 6 quarterback coaches, and 7 execs whose specialties include analytics and game management. Out of 32, Davis Mills is 27. Not necessarily too mad about that. I would personally like to see who else is on that list. But Cody, 27. I mean, just take it easy before you breathe a little bit before you speak, because I'm sure you're going to be one of the few that is up in arms over this.
I'm not going to be up in arms because I expect it at this point, John, listeners and viewers. And let me just say this, and I'm going to leave it like this. Starting Friday, we're going to see whether or not Davis Mills deserves more respect. Because I guarantee you, there's no way in hell for the 100th time, if you're doing a quarterback ranking, I'm not about to sit here and say Davis Mills deserves to be in the top 10 or top 15 or whatever the case might be. But I guarantee you, Zach Wilson was placed higher. I guarantee you Trey Lance was placed higher. I guarantee you that Trevor Lawrence was placed higher. I guarantee you, and I hate to say this because I really do like the young man, Justin Fields was placed higher.
I will say a defensive coordinator did say that he loved this kid. This is a defensive coordinator who went against Davis Mills last year. He continued with, I think he is so poised. He stands in the pocket. He is able to deliver the ball. I think he knows where to go with the ball. He throws a pretty ball. He throws a catchable ball. He sees the field. He's a 3. So one defensive coordinator spoke highly of Davis Mills. A personnel director said he really liked his composure. He makes plays in the passing game. Doesn't have the best arm, but is an inadequate passer. He reminds me of a better Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton was a franchise quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals for nearly 10 years, and so maybe Davis Mills with a better supporting cast could possibly do the same for the Houston Texans. If you are living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be very stressful when unexpected expenses come up. I understand that. I've been there myself. Everybody has, right? But now Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. There's more money. That's more money for bills, more money to fill your tank, more money for a wedding gift if you have a friend that's jumping the broom. You can finally tackle those expenses that has been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That is DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve and member FDIC.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans. And as promised, I have my colleague from Sports Illustrated, Cole Thompson. Cole, what's going on, my guy? And welcome back to Locked On Texans.
feel like that I should just be a stable here. But more specifically, I'm just glad that we actually have something to talk about because what are we now? 72 hours away from actually being on the practice field? I mean, like that's a big plus for us because all we hear in the offseason is, are they going to do this? What's going on with that? And then we go to OTAs and we go to minicamp and we see just a glimpse of a little bit of promise. Now we actually get to see what this whole team is about. How much have they improved underneath Lovie Smith and Nick Caserio in year 2 of the retooling, as Caserio does not like the word rebuilding for some reason, when we all know what you're saying, Nick.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I want to get your thoughts on the loss of John Mechie, potentially for the season. As you saw on Sunday, he announced that he is going through a battle of leukemia. Thankfully, it is one of the most curable forms, but at the end of the day, shout out prayers to John Mechie. Cole, what are your thoughts on the loss of John Mechie? And not only that, how do you see the loss of John Mechie actually affecting this Houston Texans offense moving forward?
Well, for starters, as an Alabama alum, I would just like to send my condolences and a roll tide to Mechie and his family during this difficult process. It is very curable, treatable. The most significant name that was brought up with this process in the past was Chuck Pagano during his first season at the helm when he was in Indianapolis. And eventually Bruce Arians got the opportunity to coach with Andrew Luck, and that led to him getting the Arizona Cardinals job. But we know that this is a very treatable process, so Mechie should be fine in the long term with his health. Here's the thing. Nick Caserio said at the very beginning of camp, we are not going to rush Mechie back. And that was from the torn ACL. So whether or not he was diagnosed with leukemia, if he was put on the NFI list or the PUP list at the start of the year, that should not come as any surprise. One of the main factors with Caserio in this process for the retooling of the Texans is they are not going to risk long-term injuries for this rookie class because these are players who are first and second round picks. These are names that we're featuring that are supposed to be part of the long-term foundational process. So a guy like John Mechie, if he was not fully capable of returning at capacity to run routes, work after the catch in the slot, build that repertoire and connection with Davis Mills and the other receivers, he was not going to practice. He was going to be on the PUP. He was going to be limited. And that is a big factor. And I do love that not only the Texans, but also the organization and Mechie are both agreeing we want to work about this for the long term. The one thing that this does mean for him is that he is going to have, on top of all the love and support and care and treatment for his leukemia, he is going to have time to fully rehabilitate that torn ACL to where by the time he comes back in 2023 or late in 2022, he will be fully ready to go. We won't have to worry about him being on the PUP list. We won't have to worry about seeing him take any regression. It will be a positive progress for him moving forward. Now, for the Texans, one loss is one gain for someone else. Mechie was going to be a clear-cut, automatic top final 53-man roster. He was not going to get cut. He was going to be a part of the staff. So this is an opportunity for one of these younger receivers, like maybe a Drew Estrada from Baylor or a Johnny Johnson III from Oregon, who averaged 12.5 yards per catch last season with the Ducks, to maybe take that place and make the final 53-man. But it also is an opportunity for one of these veterans, the Phillip Dorsetts, the Davion Davises, the Chris Moores, the Chris Conleys, all of them to fight for that number 3 role. And if all else fails, well, the Texans now know we need to add a reliable slot target for our quarterback if we want to be successful, primarily on third down. We've seen this a lot. There's been links to him for a minute because if he grew up in the greater Houston area, Cole Beasley being a potential option. Emmanuel Sanders, who grew up in the Dallas area, went to SMU, could be another potential option. A name that got floated around that I actually really think would be intriguing as a vertical threat if they were to remove that kind of process from Brandon Cooks would be the actual Texans killer himself, T.Y. Hilton, because if he's still a free agent and imagine him working with Davis Mills and the success that he had with another former Stanford quarterback in Andrew Luck, maybe that's a potential, but this is an opportunity for the Texans to really broaden their horizons, see what they have in the slot position, and also it gives an opportunity for these younger fringe roster players to maybe make the cut because Mechie is now on the NFI list.
You said something that really caught my attention. You talked about, throughout these press conferences that you and I have been a part of ever since the draft, Nick Caserio has talked about a lot about the long-term plans with these rookies. And of course, the number one rookie that the Houston Texans have is Derek Stingley Jr. with training camp starting up on Friday, do you have any type of concerns on whether or not Derek Stingley is going to be able to take the helm as this team's number one cornerback? Because look, like I say here a lot on this show, you're looking at a guy who only played 3 games last season. He's coming off a very serious foot injury, and you was there along with me going all the way back to rookie mini camp. We have not seen Derek Stingley participate in any real true on-field activities with the rest of his teammates.
Look, to be fair, I do think that Derek Stingley is going to pan out and be a very capable number one cornerback in the NFL for a very long time. But to put the pressure on him as a kid coming off of a lymphistic injury that required major surgery on his foot that takes potential time. I mean, Kevin White had the same type of injury when he was with the Chicago Bears and never recovered. To say that he's going to be your number one cornerback right on the get-go is a bit of an outlier. So to answer your question, for that number one status, yes, I have a lot of concerns. I have a multiple amount of concerns because we have not seen him practice against Brandon Cooks. We have not seen him gone up against Nico Collins. We have not seen him gone up against even guys like Chris Moore and Philip Dorsett who have that speed and that capability to win as vertical options down the field. So there are some concerns, but that is why Nick Caserio, after the draft, made sure they went and addressed the quarterback position or before the draft and added in Steven Nelson, who is a very capable number two cornerback. And at the very beginning of the year, potentially could be lining up against those number one receivers, those Michael Pittman Juniors, those the Christian Kirks in Jacksonville, the Amari Coopers when they face off against the Cleveland Browns if Stingley's not back. Now, again, Stingley was drafted to be the number one guy, and I do think that he is fully back in course to where he's probably going to start at some point very early on, hopefully week 1. But it would not shock me if you see him go up against the team's number 2 receiver to start to get acclimated with playing defense, to get up to NFL speed, to work alongside these receivers, because that is a major factor. But again, this was, in my opinion, one of 2 right picks for Houston. We had heard throughout the entire offseason the importance from Lovie Smith to get a bona fide number 1 cornerback, and it felt like down the stretch it was going to be Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, who went 1 pick later, or it was going to be Stingley. So it was Stingley or Sauce. Ultimately, what I like about this is that Nelson has the experience to where he can come into camp, kind of be that vocal backbone of what you need for a young cornerback like Stingley. And to begin the year, against a team like Indianapolis and a few other of those high-profile games, if you need him to match up against a number 1 receiver, well, he probably can do it while Stingley plays the number 2 and gets slowly adjusted to the NFL. So there are some concerns, but it's the concerns of him going up against that number 1 guy and getting torched that will hurt his confidence for the long term rather than it is that short term. And again, cornerback is honestly one of the toughest positions to transition from the collegiate level to the professional level. So he is going to take a lot of time. I mean, AJ Terrell was one of the few names that had a very decent rookie season. And then in year 2, he popped. And now we're talking about him like an all-pro top 5 cornerback. I mean, that could be the very similar case with Derek Stingley. And we're more so looking at 2024 with him being a top 10 cornerback versus 2023 with him being, maybe top 25 and being that number 1 guy. It's more so just about getting him acclimated with Lovie Smith's defense.
Do you believe there's going to be, I guess, for the sake of this argument, as we sit here right now on July 26, 2022, a couple of days away from the start of training camp, do you believe there's going to be a battle for that number 2 cornerback? Because, yes, Steven Nelson was a tremendous signing for the Texans during free agency. However, you still got Tavierre Thomas, who was probably arguably their best DB going back to last season.
Yeah, but the problem is it's not going to be at that number 2 perimeter cornerback spot. It's going to be the nickel cornerback spot, and that's going to be between Tavierre Thomas and Desmond King, because King last year had to play on the outside because he was the only one that was consistent at getting those stops against bigger receivers. And naturally, he's been a nickel defender since coming out of Iowa back when he was drafted by the Chargers in 2017. And he's an all-pro nickel defender, so he has the experience and the reps to be a very good run-based defender, but at the same time, there was not a player that impressed more down the stretch and really for most of the second half of the season defensively than Tavierre Thomas. So you look at how he actually took strides in this Lovie Smith zone-based defense. He's going to have an opportunity to show that he is the number 1 cornerback. And then what you're going to have is kind of that battle for the number 2 spot, maybe on the perimeter with Desmond King and Steven Nelson, or you're going to have King have to work his way in at some other capacity. Maybe they'll try him at safety if things don't work out with guys such as Jonathan Owens and MJ Stewart and Eric Murray along with Jalen Petrie. So they can always try that. But I feel like Nelson was brought in for a reason, and that was to start on the outside because if he has the length, he has the agility, he has the mental quickness, he has the lateral movement, he has all the capable tools of what you're looking for in a decent number 2 cornerback. The real battle for me is the inside with nickel defender because Thomas had a really, really, really strong season last year, especially toward the end of the year. But at the same time, 1 year is not enough to guarantee that he's going to be a bona fide superstar long term. And the same thing can be said about Desmond King. Can he get back to being that all-pro potential nickel defender and compete with Thomas?
There's a lot that's been made about Pep Hamilton taking over as this team offensive coordinator heading into camp. What are some of the intangibles that you're going to be looking at in terms of how you want to see this offense ran for this 2022 campaign?
I got to see what that 12 personnel is going to look like with the tight end position because they went out and they've said multiple times, Tim Benevic, the new tight end coach, Pep Hamilton, Lovie Smith, our offense is catalyzed based off of our 12 personnel. We want to run 2 tight end sets. Benevic, who worked with Hamilton when he was the OC in Indianapolis, replacing Bruce Arians, said in the office they had so much to work with the 12 personnel. That eventually led to them getting Colby Fleener, and that eventually led to them getting Jack Doyle, and that eventually forced them to have to run more of a 2 tight end set. With Houston, what's going to be really interesting is how do they do the 2 tight end set because Brevin Jordan is a really up-and-coming good receiving aspect, but he offers very little as an inline blocker. But at the same time, when you look at the position, are you going to run a 12 personnel with 2 tight ends tight, or are you going to have one be a flex option, one with the hand in the dirt as your traditional wide tight end? And who's going to step up and be that number 2 tight end? Is it going to be Pharaoh Brown, who did have a very promising minicamp, but we've also seen him have a ton of drops in games. We've also seen him regress immensely in pass pro and as a run blocker. They added in Tegan Kieran-Toriano from Oregon State with the 6th-round pick. And I like Kieran-Toriano as a blocker, but can he be an efficient pass catcher in the red zone? He says he models his game after George Kittle, drafted near the same slot as where Kittle was. Maybe the Texans have that. Is Anthony Auclair going to be able to step up as more than just a blocking tight end? And is there anybody else out there that maybe takes those right needs to be that number 2? Ultimately, the way this offense is going to be catered is 12 personnel, 12 personnel, 12 personnel. I think that the Texans are probably going to be in the top 5 when we see 12 personnel reps for the season in snap counts. Who's going to be that number 2 tight end, and who's going to be able to win that traditional wide tight end position opposite of Brevin Jordan? That's the really big thing that I'm looking at.
Last question before getting out of here. What are some of the intangibles that you're going to be looking at for Davis Mills? You can't talk about the offense without talking about this team's starting quarterback. I'm not going to call him the franchise quarterback as of yet.
I think that's kind of it. Does he take the right steps? And by the way, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's funny because I have a buddy who covers the Jaguars, and he tweeted out not too long ago, Davis Mills might be the most overrated quarterback in the NFL. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, let's pause real fast. Number one, nobody's overrating Davis Mills. And if they are, they're very desperate for an actual franchise quarterback. So that's kind of the reason why. But number 2, I think that we all can admit that Mills exceeded expectations last season.
Thank you.
And he still is a bottom 10 quarterback going into this year. I think that we can admit that both things can be true. And again, that's kind of the process of what you're looking at. He got better when it came to his completion rating. He got better with his decision-making. His red zone offense in the final 5 starts was the highest in the NFL. I mean, these are just stats, man. They're not like us being fake. But we also can admit, anybody who has covered the team, anybody who has seen the Texans live, anybody who has a functioning brain that you should trust to actually give you the right information will say Davis Mills has not proven that he is the franchise quarterback. So the number 1 goal I think that we're all looking at is, do the Texans have a viable option for these next 17 games? And that's kind of what we're at with Davis Mills. It is a 17-game audition, and every game is going to be a new audition to where Pep Hamilton, Lovie Smith, and Nick Caserio sit down and say, okay, positives from game 1, positives from game 2, negatives from game 1, negatives from game 2. Where did he improve? Where did he regress? And by mid-season, you will kind of have an understanding. Okay, we can win with Davis Mills if we get him better supporting cast members. Or Okay, we have 2 first-round picks. There's a very good shot that we're picking top 5. We have guys like Tyler Van Dyke from Miami. We have guys like Will Levis from Kentucky, not to mention C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, Bryce Young from Alabama. We know that we need to upgrade our pass rush, and Will Anderson is going to be available. But we also have that extra first-round pick. Do we want to move up to get not only a superstar pass rusher for our defense, but also a future quarterback for our offense, somebody that we believe that has that franchise capability? There's nothing wrong with saying that Davis Mills exceeded expectations last year, but there's nothing also wrong with saying he is a bottom 10 quarterback going into this season, and there's still immense amount for him to prove before we can say he is the F word. And I'm not going to say that F word because, let's be real, F means a lot of different things in Houston right now. I think the worst one is actually franchise because, oh my God, finding a franchise quarterback it's like shooting a fish in a barrel of hay, and honestly, it's already dead. Like, let's be real. We're screwed either way, so you might as well just bank on him taking those necessary steps. That's all you're looking for at this point. Does he have any bit of franchise capability in his body?
Cole Thompson, Texans beat reporter for Sports Illustrated. Cole, really quick, where can our listeners follow you at on Twitter? And be sure to plug in all of your work.
So make sure you give me a follow at Mr. Cole Thompson. I do a lot of great coverage for NFL and college football for all of Sports Illustrated's media market. And if you want to listen to me every single day, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. or on podcast form, because let's be real, nobody wants to get up at that time besides yours truly. You got to get my beauty sleep. You can listen to my show, Just Saying It, part of the Sports Map Radio Network. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast listening systems.
Thanks for making Locked On Texans your first listen today. Now make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. Make sure you guys are checking out the Locked On NFL podcast. Welcome back to the Locked On Texans. Cody, I feel a way. And we got to talk about storylines. So what I'm about to say is going to be very brief. You guys may disagree with me, and I don't care because I don't want to see this team not be competitive. I'm seeing a lot of people just say that we should just roll here in Houston. The Texans should roll with who they have on the roster at wide receiver. And Cody, you and Cole had a conversation, and Cody mentioned this first off air before he mentioned it on air yesterday that, well, what was John Mechie's real expectations basically in this offense, because he hadn't really participated in OTAs and he was still working his way back from an injury. And I get that. However, there is a such thing as just talent beating talent. And when we look at this depth chart for the wide receiver group, the most talented, of course, Brandon Cooks. After that, we expect it to be Nico Collins, who, by the way, I think he finished the year off very well last year. I am expecting for him to build off on it. But after that, when we look at pure talent, man beating man talent, again, all of these guys are in the NFL. So they are talented. But this wide receiver depth chart, after those first two players, kind of reminds me a little bit of what this defensive line depth chart looks like for the interior guys. Yeah, you're talented. Yeah, you're in the NFL. However, are you really a staple moving forward, or are you a rotational piece? And when I look at the depth chart for the Houston Texans at wide receiver and the interior defensive line, I'm not sure who's on the bubble and who's not on the bubble, and we're not even in training camp already. Right? And so I say that to say this. It makes 100% sense to go out there and try to upgrade your wide receiver room, because if you don't, the message it sends to me when I watch teams like the Chargers, who already had Keenan Allen, got Mike Williams, went out there and put a very good receiving core around their young quarterback, right? When I look at what the Dolphins are doing in year 3 with Tua Tagovailoa, bringing in Tyreek Hill and trying to put a good wide receiving core around him. When I look at these young quarterbacks around the league, like the Jets, what they're trying to do with Zach Wilson, so there's no more excuses. I want the same thing here in Houston for Davis Mills, because, again, if it doesn't happen and if there's not talent around him, good talent around him, then the very next season we're going to be talking about how it wasn't fair, how he should be judged because he doesn't have what the rest of the league have. Well, right now, Houston, they have an opportunity to do so. They have an opportunity to go out there and maybe look at exploring a signing for Cole Beasley. And if you really want to compete, and if you really want to give your quarterback, your young quarterback in year 2 who struggled last year up until he got some rhythm with his veteran wide receiver, if you want to give him a shot, give him a chance, then I wouldn't be upset if you explore a trade. And I've seen you don't want to make a trade, you don't want to trade an asset, and the guy doesn't stay for more than 1 year. Houston has a lot of money next year, so if they trade for a wide receiver and give up one of those assets, those or maybe the third or second round pick, depending on who the player is, they'll have the money to get him signed in. And if it's not Davis Mills, at the very least, if it's not Davis Mills, well, it's for your next quarterback that you're going to potentially draft or maybe sign a free agent next year as well. Let's not get okay with being mediocre. Put the talent in the building. And when we look at this wide receiver group, it is not that talented in terms of the rest of the NFL, not the street clothes guys, not me. I know I'm not talented at playing wide receiver, but with the rest of the young quarterbacks in the NFL, it's nowhere near it. And that's a problem. That should be addressed.
Whoa, John, that got you kind of fired up today, huh?
We believe this young man can do well. Cody, you've mentioned you believe this young man is better than Zach Wilson. However, going into this year, the Jets have a very talented receiving core, right? And they went out and got Gary Wilson. They still have players that they brought in from the last couple of seasons. They have talent on that receiving core. So now it will be a fair shake if in year 2 there's no immediate jump or some type of significant jump in Zach Wilson game. We can really point to say you are not a franchise quarterback right now. But if we don't do the same for Davis Mills, then again, we're going to have the same conversation. Didn't get a fair shake. There wasn't enough talent around him. Also, now you're looking at a quarterback that's going to come to Houston next year. Well, why not invest into a wide receiver now? Because if it's not Davis Mills, it's going to be whoever else is behind center. The game is still won with playmakers, guys. And Houston lacks those. So let's change that. Storylines, Cody, what we got?
And I 100% agree with you, and I do think next to, given everything that took place on Sunday, next to John Mechie being out, the biggest storyline surrounding this wide receiving core is who's going to step up, who are they going to sign another wide receiver to help fill that void. So that's on the wide receiver end. Last week we talked about everybody else on the offensive side of the ball, and prior to training camp, I do want to shift our attention to the defensive side of the ball, starting with the defensive line. John, the biggest storyline to me is whether or not this defensive line is going to validate Nick Casario's decision to not draft a defensive edge rusher in this upcoming draft.
Or
and I say
tackle.
Or D tackle. You just finished talking about the interior defensive line, John. I do believe, going back to the 2021 draft, that Nick Caserio has done a phenomenal job, but I do believe there was a missed opportunity that he did not address that defensive line during the draft, especially considering when he made that move and got that 15th overall draft pick, and you had a guy, Jermaine Johnson, still on the board, and you took Kenyon Green. Now, I do believe in Green. I believe he's going to be a very good or very reliable player, not just throughout his career, but heading into his rookie season. However, you had Jermaine Johnson, who was arguably the second best edge rusher, the second best defensive lineman going into this draft. And it's kind of ironic that you just finished talking about the New York Jets, because that's the organization that had an opportunity to draft him with the number 26 overall pick. So we know the potential of John Gennard, but can he stay healthy? We know the potential of a Roy Lopez, but will he be able to carry that consistency that we saw through his rookie year to his sophomore season? And look, everybody else on this defensive front, there's a big ass question mark, i.e. Ross Blacklock, for the third consecutive year. Where are you?
Well, let me say this. I think for the second consecutive year, we're going to see a better version of Ross Blacklock. We have to remember that him coming into the league was very unfortunate times for the Texans, right? Like he was a 40th overall pick and Houston got him at 40 because of the trade with Arizona. That is going to be on his resume whether he likes it or not. But on top of that, more importantly, his very first year was when Anthony Weaver, who didn't have a clue about what he wanted to do with his defensive front or just defense period. Remember the I wanted to do exotic looks from Anthony Weaver. So it was a lot of unfortunate events that happened his rookie year. Last year, you saw him kind of get settled in, and the game looked more comfortable as the year went on, the weeks went on, game by game. And so for this year, I got away from wanting to put a number on success for Ross Blacklock, mainly because he's a hometown kid, and I really want to see him do good. He's from Mo City, and if you guys really know me, okay, so I want to see him do good. I think he will have an improvement this year. The storyline that I'm looking for this defensive front, of course, those edge rushers. Who's going to be opposite side of John Grenard? As of right now, I really see Rasheem Green being that guy, playing that role. And I see him and maybe Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes. I think those three players are going to do a very good job of being rotational guys. But I don't think this defense can afford to not have Roy Lopez out there as much as possible. What I think of Roy Lopez, and I've said this plenty of times on this show, and there was times last year he was able to show his potential. I think he can be like Vita Vea. But for Roy Lopez, he has to be out on the field more than what he did last year. He was a rookie, and I think that with Houston not necessarily having him cemented early on and just trying to figure things out, that probably hindered him on the field. When we look at strength and conditioning, that's going to hinder you a lot when you play in Texas and it get hot and you're not just ready yet. But he has looked phenomenal this offseason. His body looks good. And I expect for him to be on the field more times this year than he did last year. So that's the storyline for me. I really like Roy Lopez. I think that he can build something. He can be a part, of something great for this defensive front in terms of stuffing the run. That is an area of Houston that has been stinky for the past 2 years.
Since they lost DJ Reader. Ain't never been the same since.
Man, shout out to DJ Reader.
I know we talk a lot about Deshaun and JJ and D-Hop, but I think the loss of DJ Reader might have been, maybe their second worst loss over the last 2-3 seasons? Because like I mentioned, John, that run defense has not looked the same since he left.
Yeah, it's not. And shout out to DJ Reader. I will say that Roy Lopez played in 46% of defensive snaps for his rookie year. I want to see that hover around 60. And for Vita Vea, his rookie year, he played in 59% of snaps. His very next year, 66. The year after that, 70. So both of these guys are in a position where year after year, you're going to be seeing more time on the playing field. Shout out to Vita Vea. I really think Vita Vea is a very phenomenal player, and I hope that Houston can get a player out of Roy Lopez like a Vita Vea. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube under the name Locked On Texans. Get your ass up in there and comment. Training camp on Friday. Ooh, I can't wait. And follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.